All right, well, welcome to our next panel of the day. This panel is entitled Cultivating Success in the Heartland, Midwest versus East Coast Dynamics. Today we're going to be exploring key strategies for thriving in markets of different levels of maturity. I personally grew up in Massachusetts. I've lived in Wisconsin and built my cannabis career over the last 6 years in California. I serve as VP Marketing for Aero Brands, and Aero Brands has expanded pretty rapidly across the country since its founding in 2017, and my marketing team oversees our brand in 24 U.S. states and territories. So with that perspective, I'm really interested in what all of my fellow panelists today have to say about their respective businesses. These four men represent companies across the country with varying different structures of doing business, from expanding through licensing to owning their licenses to being vertically integrated to operating in one state versus multiple. So I'm really looking forward to introducing them today. So before we start, I'd like to have each one of you just take a moment to introduce yourself, your company, your role, and a little bit about what you'd like to share about your perspective on expansion from these multiple markets. Yes, Bran, we'll start with you.
Thanks. My name is Bran Noonan. I'm CEO of OG's. We are a gummy manufacturing company born and bred out of Arizona, and currently we've expanded to Illinois, New Jersey, and Massachusetts on the horizon in Q1. That's who I am.
I'm Chris Dinan. I'm the CFO at Ethos Cannabis, and I see I got an unexpected promotion today, so I'll take that. But we're a vertically integrated operator based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we're in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Ohio. We've expanded significantly over the past 3 to 4 years in each of those markets.
My name's Eli Kaur. I'm the CEO of Dabstract. We are an extract company out of Washington State that's expanded to Michigan, Missouri, Illinois, and Arizona in an asset-light business model.
I'm Nick Granella, CEO of Hippos Cannabis out of Missouri. We are a vertically integrated company in Missouri, do everything from manufacturing, cultivation, dispensaries. As far as expansion, we're always looking for opportunities.
Well, Eli, I wanted to start with you. And you mentioned that Dabstract has an asset-light business model. Can you tell us a little bit about your business model and about your decision making from having started as a brand in 2016 on the rec market in Washington, how you've made decisions through that business model, and in which states you've chosen to expand to that have guided your strategy to date?
Absolutely. We chose an asset-light business model because it allows us to expand to become a national brand without incurring the CapEx and the OpEx of traditional, whether it's single state operators or multi-state operators in the traditional sense. And so what we really like to do is to be able to bring our product to as many folks as possible. And what we learned in Washington was that it really starts with the product. So you need to have a phenomenal product. When we started, the founders of the company, Derek and Dylan, for my money, are the two best extractors in this country right now. We've been able to take all of our tight SOPs, processes, formulas, and really transplant them to other states after getting to know the states and really understanding how to develop them. Does that fully answer the question?
Yeah. Yes, you touched upon the question.
Yeah.
To ask you go a little bit deeper. So with your asset-light business model, kind of what functions does Dabstract kind of have a tight hold on versus what are you kind of putting in the hands of your operating partners?
For sure. And so what we do is what we'll call an active licensing model. So what we do is we find a partner in a state that has strong cultivation, they have strong manufacturing and sell into distribution. And what we bring to the table is, and lean in with, is a lot of support on the processing and the brand and the marketing side. So we essentially complement where they may be lacking in their businesses. And together we're able to really grow and accelerate sales.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Eli. And just one more follow-up question to that. how have you found that your go-to-market strategies and in terms of like kind of your sales and marketing have had to differ into some of these markets from per se a more mature market like Washington? As you're entering some of these more growing markets in the Midwest, how has that influenced how you've gone to market?
Yeah, I think it all starts with homework. It's really understanding that while cannabis could be a national business, it's extremely local. And so it always starts with data and analysis, really understanding the market, going into the market, meeting people, and really becoming the fabric of the community. And then from there, what we've decided is to really focus on states where there's limited license opportunities, so we can really come in and bring a competitive brand into that state. And then from there, we build a marketing plan around that to make sure that there's menu diversity, that there's different strains, that there's a different product assortment that people will want to purchase, and that buyers will want to bring into their stores, because they have to make decisions as well to make sure that their stores are moving product.
Bran, I'm going to move to you now because OG's has a very different model of expansion than Dabstract. You are now in 3 states, I believe. You launched, I think, 1 just this week.
Correct.
Maybe tell us a little bit about how OG's started on the Arizona market and how your company made decision making around how to expand, whether that be through licensing or owning your licenses, and also which markets you would choose to expand into.
We decided to be asset heavy because we are masochistic and want to own everything, and I'm a control freak. No, but seriously, we decided to own our own destiny across all the first phase of expansion markets that we went into. In Arizona, we actually are a sub-licensee, essentially. We operate under another person's license, and I always felt there was insecurity in that relationship, and you never know what can happen when you're operating under somebody else's license. And so when we went into New Jersey and in Illinois and then Massachusetts, we wanted to become license holders. Not a recommended route. It is painful to be a license holder and have to go through the process of everything that the proctological exam that they require of you to be a license holder. But that has been our main strategy out of the gate, to essentially own our own destiny from license ownership to then, of course, owning our own manufacturing, having control over our own manufacturing. I mean, as a gummy company, I always say it's easy to make a gummy. It's really hard to make a very good gummy, and so quality control for us is really important. And if we're going to enter this national landscape, we wanted out of the gate to go in controlling all facets of our manufacturing, distribution, sales, marketing, the whole thing, before we started exploring other various routes to expansion. And so that was the impetus for the choices we made.
And how have you used your early successes in the Arizona market to help guide your decision making, and help you succeed in these newer markets like Illinois and New Jersey? I mean, I guess you're just into New Jersey right now.
Sure. I mean, like being in Arizona has allowed us to test drive a variety of different things. I mean, so my story is a little bit of a different story than some folks maybe. I inherited the company from my mom, who started the company. She got in the industry in 2014, and after she passed, I took over the company. And when I inherited the company, there was so many legacy SKUs. We had to go through this whole process of trying to figure out who we were. We had to reverse engineer kind of our identity. We were beneficiaries of this great product and this great kind of brand, but we still didn't know who we were. There was no kind of foundation, because she got in back in 2014. So we had to really figure out who we were, what our products were. We had to rationalize SKUs to set ourselves up for this expansion, because we learned in Arizona that you can't just have 30 SKUs. You have to really have a tight SKU portfolio when you go into these dispensaries, and you have to be able to differentiate yourself. And when you go into these new markets, especially when there's crowded fields of gummies and edibles galore, the first thing you're going to be asked is, what makes you different than everybody else? And so we had to really kind of figure that out. And luckily, we had an incumbency position in Arizona that we were allowed to really experiment, to allow ourselves to then transfer into more of an insurgency type of position in these other markets.
Thanks a lot. Well, the title of this panel mentions the Midwest and the West Coast, but for one of our companies, Ethos, they actually started on the East Coast. So we are a panel representing brands nationally, and Chris is here in place of Gibran, who couldn't make it because he's based in Florida. Thank you for joining us, Chris. I wanted to hear a little bit from you about Ethos expansion philosophy and strategy, having started in East Coast markets like Pennsylvania and Maryland, and kind of expanded west. If you can tell us a little bit about how you've gone about that strategically.
Sure. So I think it's been a unique experience really starting in a lot of the East Coast markets, which themselves have really been stood up as relatively limited licenses states. That limited license dynamic within the markets has absolutely favored leveraging vertical integration through the manufacturing and retail operations within the business. So, we've really looked and begun a model in Pennsylvania, which is about kind of scaling, identity in terms of manufacturing, competency, developing brands from a wholesale market, and then leveraging that through retail operations. I think some of the points that Eli brought up, it tends to be a very capital-intensive model. Really, you're trying to create a business kind of nuts to bolts all the way from day one, with the most intensive, capital investments really coming early on. That's a difficult dynamic to, I think, replicate in a lot of more mature markets, especially on the West Coast. But it's been advantageous in the East Coast to be able to kind of develop that model in the state like we started in Pennsylvania, and then expand that to Massachusetts and now to Ohio. And that said, we also did do some expansion into a state like Maryland where we focused on retail operations, but we realized the business model we've developed does not really play unless we have that vertical integration. Now that said, I think there's going to be opportunities kind of moving forward in markets where everybody needs to figure out how to kind of decide what their best practices are and figure out opportunities to be able to expand into markets and focus on what they're best at. It's difficult to be the best at everything all the time. Limited license states have allowed you to do that, but those markets are getting more mature, and everybody else operating in those markets is also getting more mature. So I think when we're looking forward and expanding it into more opportunities, it's about leveraging some of the learning experiences that we have from previous markets and expanding those into the new markets. One of the things that I think is critically important to understand is also, I think expanding into new markets. And one of the things that we're starting to see is that first mover advantage, which has been so critical in the cannabis industry for a lot of people getting licenses and being able to leverage those for some type of first mover advantage where you really have 18, 24 months of good runway, is shrinking. You really need to have good, solid operations when you're entering new markets within a few months, because the market maturity is happening so much quicker than it was early on in the industry. Even 3-4 years ago, we're just seeing so much more quick price consolidation, increases in supply so much quicker than they were in the past, that I think it's a dynamic that everyone needs to adjust for and recognize that the speed of the movement in those markets when you're expanding into new markets is going to be quicker than your last experience.
Thank you very much. We were chatting backstage. Chris, you mentioned that Ethos did own a license in New Jersey, and you were in Maryland, and you made decisions to either not pursue that license or to pull out of Maryland. So can you share a little bit about the decision making around what not to do? Because I think that's actually something that this industry could really learn from and potentially do more of, is to say no to opportunities rather than always saying yes. And it seems like your company's made some smart decisions in that capacity.
Well, I think the biggest challenge is, really going into these markets, you need to understand two dynamics. One, which I mentioned before, I think what you do well early on and how you can replicate that quickly. The other thing that's really unique that I think we need to evaluate whenever you're going into a new market is the idea of, how does that regulatory environment that you're going into map closely to existing regulatory environments that you've operated in? One of the challenges that we have across cannabis is this patchwork of regulatory environments, and not only the patchwork of regulatory environments, but the patchwork of enforcement within those markets. So understanding the dynamics of when you can come in and how you're going to be able to operate with the regulators in that market. And is that regulatory body similar, or is their approach to regulation similar to what you've operated in other markets? Being able to kind of replicate that rather quickly and understand the dynamics, not only from a supply and demand perspective of going into a market, but understanding the regulatory environment that you're going into, and does your business model work within that regulatory environment that you're going to go into, is critical.
Thank you. So our first three panelists are all representing companies that operate in multiple markets, and we were just talking about the decision making around expansion or retraction. I wanted to speak with Nick on our panel here about his experience as an individual professional coming from the California market to Missouri, as well as your company's decision to really focus on Missouri. Can you share a little bit about your personal journey joining Hippos, and then Hippos' business strategy in terms of really focusing in on the Missouri market?
Absolutely. So I came out of the California market originally. I was there. I left in 2019. We had the first licensed cannabis distributor there. It was in Southern California, the first licensed one in Southern California, not the whole state. But as many of you guys know, all the products, once it went rec in California, had to go through this through the distributor. So we got to see all these different products and how things were how things were being received, how things weren't being received. Really, from California operates like several different states within one state. So you have the Northern California market wants one thing, the Southern California market wants another thing. The distribution tier nearly collapsed in California, or essentially did collapse. So that's when I made the move to Missouri, where they had a limited license market. Went there in 2019, had the honeymoon phase that Chris was kind of talking about earlier. Where you have this runway where you're the only game in town somewhat. Missouri in particular, you had to have, I think it was 50% ownership had to be from the state of Missouri. So you didn't have a lot of out-of-state brands. And quite frankly, I learned this when I was in California. All of us in this room, we know what our brands are. Like, you know the big brands in California. The big brands here in Illinois, some of these other brands, but does the general public know these brands? For the most part, they don't. And it became really evident when I was in California, what was driving the customer. And they were going to the dispensaries to buy weed. Everybody that I ran into was going to buy weed. They weren't going to buy, one of our brands is Sundro. They weren't going to buy Sundro. They were going to buy weed, and hopefully I was able to convince the bud tenders to sell them Sundro. But I wasn't really talking to the general public, and I don't see much of that now. And so as far as brands in my experience, when you take that into the state of Missouri, we have, we've been there since 2019. Well, you got these brands that are coming from out of state, and obviously everybody saw like how great the Missouri market was. We went from a medical market to we went to this robust, comprehensive license rec market. And within that market was really big for us because I think we border like 7 states or 6 states that don't have, that aren't recreational use, or we border Illinois, which has, extremely high taxes. Fortunately, I was on that committee when we were writing the law in Missouri, and I was screaming, hey, we need these low taxes. So we got these low tax rates, and so that's bringing in a lot of consumers from all over the place. But so that also brought a big spotlight on the rest of the country. They saw these numbers. They got this little state of Missouri, and they're doing these huge numbers. And so then you had a lot of these companies coming from out of state, and they're like, how do we get a piece of this, right? Like, our market's dying in California or Oregon or Washington, or things are just drying up. We've kind of hit our ceiling, and now we see Missouri as a submerging market. And so within that, for us, we started off in medical. It's not, there's not too many markets that are that sexy during the medical phase, right? And so companies like ourselves, these vertically integrated companies, we were out there advocating and pushing our own brands, building our brands, because there's no money left over to have any split with an out-of-state brand or somebody that wants us to build up their brand in our state. Just didn't make sense. Then you roll over into rec. We've built these relationships. And Missouri's pretty unique to the other states. Like I operated in California. I was on several different, boards and committees and this, that, and the other, and it was very fragmented. Missouri, everybody knows each other. And I think one of the things about the cultivating success between the Midwest or the West Coast or the East Coast, coming out of the beverage industry, I saw the same thing. We could usually see a trend on the West Coast long before it hit the Midwest. So we kind of knew, like, Fat Tire, for example, was going to be cool, or Lagunitas, or some of these things were going to be cool. All of a sudden, we bring those brands in. We know they're going to be good. We also see that trend leave out in California. It stays in the Midwest for a while. So it was a little bit more predictable. I think the same thing it holds true for cannabis. You also need to have, it's all about relationships. Much like Eli, I believe, like, we have the best extractor in the country too, right? But we also have the relationships. And I think that at the end of the day, when you're going to look for someone to white label your products, you obviously want to make sure their facilities, you want to kick the tires, you want to go check it out to make sure that their facilities are up to snuff and that they're operationally, their people know what they're doing. But I think beyond that, you want to make sure they actually have the relationships with the retail outlets. And what are the bud tenders, the people that are actually selling their products, what do they think about it? So I think those are the things that you need to look for.
Well, it sounds like you guys have gone really, really, really deep in Missouri and have a lot of expertise that can probably be useful to a lot of folks that are here. In the remaining minutes on our panel, I wanted to kind of get back to give everyone a chance to maybe share a little bit about of the markets that your company's operating in. Maybe Eli, we'll start with you. Which is currently your favorite market to operate in and why, and maybe also your least favorite market to operate in and why?
I'll say that Illinois is my favorite market to operate in, not just because we're here, but we have a phenomenal partner, a vertically integrated group, and I think that goes back to what's been sort of shared on this panel, is you need a really strong partner to really support your brand and to trust your brand in the state. I think for us, we're very participatory. We have meetings every week at the sales, marketing, and production level with all of our groups. But with our partner in Illinois, we have a lot of boots on the ground. We have a lot of participation. We have new products coming out all the time, a lot of strain diversity. And so in Illinois, I think there's yet to be a marquee couple brands. And I think there's a phenomenal opportunity in this state and in new limited license states that are coming online to really start early. And it really complements a lot of what Chris was talking about, where we'll go in and we'll find a group like the one in Illinois or in like a few other states that we're looking at, where they've already spent the CapEx. They already have a whole staff. They have OpEx. They have a sales team. They're ready to go, and they have the relationships with retail you were describing. And for us, we really want to just channel the brand through that and really support them as an active partner in the state. So for my money, Illinois is just the tops.
We'll stick with the top for now, and if we have time,
Yeah,
we'll go to
thank
the
God.
lower
Yeah.
ones. Chris, how about you?
I'll go back to our experience in Pennsylvania, and I think why it's been so positive for us. I think hitting on some of the points Eli talked about being able to kind of really develop partnerships. Not only with, we think of each other in this business oftentimes not only as customers but vendors as well, right? There's a two-way relationship that oftentimes goes back and forth with a lot of people. Pennsylvania has been an environment with the limited license structure that's really allowed us to cultivate a lot of those relationships for the benefit of both parties. And then also that partnership, with the state, regulatory authorities, and basically, I think a partnership where they're really advocating for growing the industry and being supportive in a way that sees a long-term future and in the state, and really wants to cultivate that going forward with all the operators in the state. I think finding a culmination of states that you can operate in and have those partnerships with to develop your business, but then also work in an environment that is pro-cannabis really is the environments you need to be looking for, and the environments that are going to help generate a healthy business in the future.
Thanks. And Bran, how about you for OGs?
My favorite market is like asking me what my favorite child is, and I think that I love them all equally, and the one who's behaving the best right now is New Jersey. Nothing against Illinois, I love Illinois, but New Jersey is so new to the cannabis industry from a rec standpoint. Even the medical market was so immature. So when they turned the lights on, it took them years to even get the rec market mature. And we have retailers just knocking on our door to onboard us, and that's the most fantastic feeling we've ever had. It's usually we fight to get on shelves at the end of the day or stay on shelves and so forth, and nobody's asking us for a discount at all. So New Jersey is being very, very behaving well. Between Illinois and Arizona, who's misbehaving? The thing about Illinois is the IDOA. If you're here, I'm sorry, but they're tough. They're tough on us. They add a lot of cost. They impact our margins because of the amount of regulatory kind of additional hurdles that we have to deal with. And that regulatory regime really places additional stress on us from a cost standpoint and an operational standpoint. So if you're here, please help us.
Something I think is interesting, cannabis is a consumer product, and we're at a cannabis capital convention, and I noticed that on the agenda there is very little, that we don't have a lot of content on kind of the consumer and the focus on consumer and consumer education. When I think as a marketer about the opportunities in the Midwest versus these more mature markets, I think about education and brand building. That's where you create value. We have this race to the bottom, this price compression, cannabis as a commodity, and so I'm interested if any comments that any of the panelists have around differences or opportunities in consumer education and how you can take what you've learned or what you've seen not work, or maybe not work, but done poorly in terms of creating this race to the bottom in markets like California and Washington to bring into these maybe some of these more emerging markets to create more brand value for consumers.
Well, I want that one.
Then I'll jump on.
I would just say that for us, again, having a quality product, putting our money, reinvesting our money into our brand, developing our brand kind of identity, this real investment in who we are is really important to do that kind of kind of 101 CPG type of stuff. Now, from a marketing standpoint, we employ a very kind of traditional guerrilla style marketing tactics and strategy to get on the ground, to educate people, to get in front of people, kind of that Red Bull style type of marketing. We want to be participants in the community. We want to improve normalization and help with anti-stigmatization. And so because consumers are, especially on the East Coast, they don't know what RSO is and live resin and live rosin, and they're so confused. And so for us, being in front of them, being inside cannabis, doing inside cannabis events, but finding plenty of stuff outside of cannabis. Like we'll go to farmers markets and try to set up booths and do handouts at farmers markets. So we're trying to just be everywhere we can to kind of build brand awareness, drive people to the dispensaries, get people out of the shadows. People want to go to dispensaries, but they're afraid to go to dispensaries. So how do you get people to treat it like a regular old business? That's a little bit of what we do.
Thank you. And Eli, I know you want to jump in here.
I'm champing at the bit here. What I would say is that before we even get to the consumer, you're selling to the buyer at retail, then you're selling to the bud tender, and then you're selling to the consumer. So what we typically look at is a fulsome approach where you're trying to speak to all three tiers. And I think in a lot of ways, when you're working with the buyers, they have a certain set of considerations that are critical for them. You have to address those. Then the bud tenders, and we use seed talent, a ton of tremendous educational tools to do that. And then what we also have is the consumer. And what we've found, especially in Illinois, is sampling. Because that really shows the difference between your products, is being able to show all three of those tiers that your product is different and differentiated. And so for us, in a lot of ways, because everyone has the best extractors or everyone has the best vape or the best gummy, whatever it is, we want to prove that to the consumer, and that's what we do through sampling. And as a shameless plug, you could sample our products at the after party this evening. So please feel free.
And ours, and theirs.
All of ours. Yeah.
We only have like about 10 more seconds according to this clock here. But Nick, did you want to jump in and say one last comment?
The one thing I would say is, when you're building a brand is, we talked about all the different tiers or the bud tenders, this, that, and the other, is think about the people in the back of the dispensary that are pulling your products. Make it simple on them. When all the products look the same, it's very confusing. They will stop carrying your products, so make it simple.
All right. Well, thank you to my panelists, and I'm sorry this was so short. Everyone will be here the rest of the day if you have more questions.